Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video I will be talking about how to shoot portraits in kind of Christmas illuminations, like we have them here. So stay with me until the end. We are starting right now. In this video I will be talking about how I am shooting portraits in night illuminations, not just night portraits. Well, it has a lot of similar points compared to like shooting portraits, just night portraits in the city, but it also has just a few different things. So I will be talking about this right now. I will be talking about what kind of gear I'm using, what kind of settings I have, what kind of lighting and what kind of accessories I'm using. So, well, let's start with my gear. Like when I'm shooting portraits in night illuminations, like this kind of sparkling lights behind me, I want to use prime lens. I don't want to use zoom lenses or anything. I just want prime lens, which is as bright as possible, because I want the illuminations behind me to have some really beautiful bokeh. And the lenses that I am using for shooting portraits in illuminations are, well, mainly my most favorite 135mm lens at f2, and the other lens that I am using sometimes for shooting portraits in illuminations, it's the 85mm 1.8. So these are my most used lenses for shooting this kind of portraits. And I also do have 24mm, which is 1.4. But to be honest, when shooting this kind of illuminations, I prefer to have something which is more than 50, more than 85. That's why I tend to use the 85 and the 135. And when you use this kind of long prime lens, you're going to be able to compress the background and create some really beautiful shapes behind your subject. So about the camera, well, whatever camera is gonna do the job. I prefer using full-size camera rather than crop sensor camera, because with the full size you can have, with the same focal length, you can get much more beautiful bokeh, much more well-shaped and nice bokeh. So that's why I prefer to use the full-size camera rather than APS-C. And yeah, with the full-size camera you're also gonna get some better noise performance, high noise performance. So mainly that's why I prefer to use the full-size camera. For me, I am using mainly two cameras, the Canon 5D Mark II and the 1DX. These are my main cameras. And right now, actually, this video, I am shooting it with the 1DX, and I have the 135mm lens, and it's set at 2.0 aperture. So this kind of background right now here, it's a 2.0 aperture 135mm lens on my 1DX. The next important point when shooting portraits in this kind of night illuminations, it's your lighting. Yeah, actually, the things that I was talking about up to now, they're maybe not that much different from just shooting portraits in the night. And actually, I do have a video about shooting portraits in the night, and I will insert a link to that video in the description below, so make sure you check that video as well. So the next thing about shooting this kind of portraits in night illuminations, it's the lighting. What kind of lights I'm using? I prefer using strobes. I want to use strobes because if you use a video light like I'm doing right now in this video, if I'm using video light, what's gonna happen is that if I probably shake the camera just a little bit, it might get some blurry pictures and your subject might get blurry and not sharp as you want it. But when you're using strobes, no matter how much you just happen to shake your camera, you're gonna get your subject sharp, because your strobe fires in an instant. And even if your subject moves just a little bit, it's not gonna affect your picture. It's just gonna affect the background, but the background is blurred anyway, so you're not gonna notice that much difference. So I wanna use strobes because they freeze your subject really sharp, and they're doing a great job. So the strobes that I am using most for shooting this kind of portraits, well, actually I'm using two kind of strobes for most of my photo shoots. It's the Nichiren MG8000 and the Nichiren i60A. How do I choose which one to use? Well, actually I'm using the MG8000 for shoots that I'm going to be using full power quite often. If I'm using full power quite often and in long period of time, I want to use the MG8000 because it doesn't overheat and it's just going to keep on firing whatever you do, no matter how much you overuse the strobe, it's just gonna keep on doing the job. About the i60, the Nischin i60, it's a really great small strobe. It's very compact. It's almost the half size of the MG8000, which is really amazing, and it's almost the same power. It's relatively the same power, probably just a third of the stop weaker than the MG8000, but it's very compact and small. So when I'm just going out in the night like this and I want to shoot some night portraits, I'm really happy if I can go with a strobe which is compact and small. And actually, when shooting portraits in the night like this, shooting portraits in this kind of illumination like this, you do not need a very powerful strobe. And actually, the most of the settings that I'm using even right now, because I was shooting just until now in this kind of location, the most of the settings I'm using with my i60 strobe are like 1/32 of a power. Mostly I might go to 1/16, but probably it's just like 1/32, 1/64 of a power, so you don't really need that much power. The other very important thing is your accessories, your lighting modifiers. Depending on what image you want for your night portrait, your illumination portrait, you might want to change your modifier. And actually I'm using 3 types of modifiers for most of my photo shoots. It might be umbrella, it might be a softbox, or it might be a beauty dish. These are my most 3 used modifiers. And when I'm shooting this kind of portraits, I tend to use a little bit more directional light. Depending on the image that I want to get for my final image, I might change what kind of modifier I'm using. I tend to use more directional light. That's why, well, the image that I'm going to be showing you later in my video, most of them are shot with the Cactus 60x60 softbox, and I do use a grid on the softbox because I just like directional light. If I want some softer light, I'm going to be using umbrella, which is going to give me much more softer light. But the issue with the umbrella that I might not be liking so much is that the umbrella is going to spread some light below your subject and on the ground. So sometimes I don't like this. I don't like this kind of things. That's why I prefer to use the directional light, which is going to spread the light quite much to your subject, and it's going to create some really beautiful dramatic lighting. The next thing, in my video about how to shoot night portraits, I mentioned that I am using orange filters for night portraits. I do use orange filters for night photography. Actually, when shooting portraits in this kind of illuminations, I do not use orange filters because these illuminations are beautiful the way they are. Most of them are just LED lights. So when I'm shooting this kind of illuminations, I want to keep the white balance to just match the LED lights the way they are. So when I'm shooting with strobes, the strobes has the white balance, which is around 5,600, 5,700. So yeah, when I'm shooting illumination portraits, that's the white balance I'm using. I'm not using orange filters, I'm not using blue filters. In most of the cases, I just keep the white balance the way it is. The next important point, when shooting portraits in illuminations, depending on how much bokeh you want in the illuminations, you might want to change the distance between the illuminations and your subject. Also, you might want to change the distance between your camera and your subject. If you have your subject really close to the illuminations, actually you're not going to get that much of a bokeh because it's going to be close. But the more the illuminations gets further from the model, the more it's going to be blurred and has some really beautiful bokeh. The other thing you might want to consider is maybe you want to have some illuminations as a front bokeh, not only as a back bokeh. So it's going to be really creative and beautiful sometimes to just find some kind of small illumination and include it in front of your subject, which is going to create some really beautiful effects as well. Next, let's talk just a little bit about the settings. When shooting portraits in illuminations, I already mentioned what my white balance is, around 5,600. And next I'm going to mention about my exposure triangle, the shutter speed, the aperture, and the ISO. I'm keeping my aperture at 2.0 if I'm shooting with a 135mm lens, and I don't change that because I want the most of that bokeh. I want the bigger, beautiful bokeh behind my subject. Oh, that's just my style. I don't want to close the aperture. I just keep it wide open, and I don't want to think about it when I'm shooting. I just keep it at wide open aperture and I just forget about it. Next, my shutter speed. I want to keep my shutter speed as stable as I can hold it. As I already mentioned, I have a strobe which is going to freeze the subject very beautiful, but I still want to probably get a little bit sharp the background. So I'm trying to keep my shutter speed at around probably 60, but I am usually changing the shutter speed between 30 and between around 125. So this is giving me very different balance between the subject and the background. And when I change my shutter speed, I just control how much of the back illuminations I want. If I'm changing the shutter speed, I guess you know, I do not change the exposure of the model. I just change the background. And the exposure of the model is controlled by my ISO, my aperture, and my flash power. So these are my settings. I try to keep my ISO, depending also on what kind of illuminations I'm shooting at. I'm trying to keep my ISO at around probably 1000. If it's much brighter, like, yeah, these are kind of brighter illuminations behind me. I'm in Tokyo, it's quite bright here. Right here I was like 640 or 800. Yeah, I have my shutter speed at around probably 60. I have my ISO at around 1000. My aperture is wide open. And this already gives me great exposure of the illuminations. And the next thing I just have to do is just adjust my strobe with the modifier so I can get some really beautiful light on my subject. We can shoot with one light. That's what I'm doing actually most of the time. Sometimes I might add a second light opposite of my main light, which is going to create some beautiful separation between the model and the background. So to summarize the things, full-size camera is the best, I believe. A long prime lens like 85 or 135 or something even longer, it's going to get some really beautiful shapes in the illuminations. Wide open aperture. The wider your aperture, the most beautiful and nice bokeh you're going to get behind your subject. Also try to get a strobe which is going to freeze your subject. Even if you shake your camera a little bit, it's not going to affect the sharpness of your subject. Also try to find a modifier that is going to create the beautiful light that you need. I prefer to use umbrella or softbox, which is creating really beautiful, nice light. The next point is that I do not use any filters when shooting illuminations because they are LED lights. I want to keep them the way they are. I'm shooting with the white balance of my strobes. These are my main topics about shooting portraits in night illuminations. It's this season right now, so if you find something useful, please feel free to click the like button below. I would really appreciate it. And if you have any questions about what I was talking about today, don't hesitate to leave me a comment. I will do my best to reply all of your comments. Okay, so thanks for watching my video until the end, and I hope to see you in the next video. And also, if this is the first time to check my channel, don't forget to click the subscribe button because I'm gonna be uploading a lot of videos about my techniques from now on as well. See you in my next video. Bye bye.